obscure form which has not gained popularity yet in India, but it's there, it's reaching there. We have our Indian website, Triveni Haikai India, and we are doing great work in promoting haiku. Now about haiku. Haiku is a Japanese form of poetry which is 400 years old. So it evolved in the Japanese courts. Initially the women were not allowed to write because the courts were dominated by males, and it was started as a group activity. They used to compose a long poem, one poet will compose a haiku, the second poet will compose another, and it was a collaborative poem. Gradually, women came to the field. Gradually, the first part of that long collaborative poem was taken out and it was used as haiku. So haiku is basically, hai means nature and ku means verse or poem. So these were basically nature poems or seasonal poems. So haiku, traditionally as it evolved in Japan, was a 3-line poem with first line having 5 syllables, second line having 7 syllables, and third line having 5 syllables again. Now with the evolution of haiku as everything grows, these rules have been routinely they have been played with. The rules which have been most commonly played with are the number of syllables. We don't write now haiku in 5-7-5 format. Brevity is the key in haiku nowadays. Now, in addition to syllables, another important rule of haiku is, since it's a nature poem or seasonal poem, it needs to have a season word. In Japanese, it's called a kigo word. Since Japanese are very nature-loving people, so they believe that the people should not confront nature. They should embrace nature. They should learn to live with nature. So they interact very closely with nature. So in every haiku you will find some season word. Season word doesn't mean you use autumn, spring, summer. Season word means, like in plains we have koel or cuckoo in summers. So when a haiku has a cuckoo in it, that means it's a summer poem. So haiku is basically a seasonal poem with a kigo word. Another important thing about haiku is that it has a structured form. Like free verse, you can write anything, you can go the rhyme, the meter is different. But in haiku, we have a structured poem. Every haiku is composed of 2 parts, a fragment and a phrase. Right? And the fragment and the phrase should have a good juxtaposition. One image should be juxtaposed on the other. They should not be connected internally. They should not be very closely connected, but they should be somehow related to each other. I'll give you the examples because this is going to be a boring lecture, but I'll give you some examples. Now, with the evolution of the haiku form, lots of things have changed, but every poet, whether it's in America, it's in UK, it's in Australia, the form is gaining popularity everywhere. They have maintained the basic essence of haiku. And the basic essence of haiku is that it is seeped in the moment. With haiku, you capture a moment. It's not you have to explain anything, you just capture a moment. You see something and you capture it in the haiku. Like with a camera, you capture a moment. Then you have to use very evocative and colorful imagery because haiku is such a condensed form. Whatever you have to say in very little words, less than 17 syllables. So you have to choose every word very carefully. Every single word in haiku matters. So when you feel while writing haiku, this word is not adding anything to the haiku, you just remove it. You have to choose every single word with deliberation. The third is haiku are normally called one-breath poetry because they should be able to be read in one breath. It's such small poetry that you can recite it in one breath. And then one of the most important factors of haiku is that a sudden sense of enlightenment. When you read a haiku, by the time you reach the last word, you feel, ah. So that is normally known as haiku moment. Some poets call it aha moment. Right? told you, traditional Japanese haiku consisted of 5-7 syllables. But in English language haiku, we don't follow that pattern anymore because Japanese sound units, which are called kana or konji, they are longer in English language. When we try to follow the Japanese pattern, what we end up is when we try to emulate their example of 5-7-5, that results in a very clunky haiku, English language haiku, with excessive use of or unnecessary use of adjectives or adverbs, which is not very desirable in a haiku. Then a cut or key-ray is essential. As I told you, the haiku consists of 2 images. So a haiku should not be a run-on sentence. That means you have written a single sentence and broken up into 3 lines. That is not a haiku. You have to be very careful that you have a cut between a fragment and a phrase. That I will explain with example. Then, that as I told you, 2 images divided into fragment and a phrase. Season words are desirable but not mandatory. Nowadays, initially Japanese wrote mostly about nature or seasons. But as we all know that we humans are also part of nature. So sometimes we write more about it, we can relate to our conditions more. So another form developed which is known as senryu. Senryu is like a close cousin of haiku. But whereas the haiku is the seasonal poem, senryu is human-based. It deals with human emotions, human idiosyncrasies, everything about human. Now, difference between haiku and senryu is nature-based, senryu is human-based. So, whereas haiku can deal with emotions, senryu is more in your face kind. They are more pointing towards the human conditions. Now, in haiku, the most common mistake newbies make is that they start every line with a capital letter. As we are told in English, every sentence starts with a capital letter, but this is not the case with haiku. There are no capital letters in a haiku. No line starts with a capital letter except when we use proper nouns or we use I. Even that is controversial. Some poets use small I in place of capital I because they say that haiku is about seasons or haiku is about nature and we don't want to emphasize ourselves. I means ego. Whereas some poets say that if we use small I, it immediately brings the attention to I, which the poet intentionally didn't want to, but somehow the small I brings the attention to it. So in haiku, no line starts with a capital letter. Then, unlike free verse poetry, we do not use poetic tools like metaphors or similes. Haiku is simple. You don't have to use fancy words. It is said that haiku, when writing a haiku or when reading a haiku, you should not have to consult a dictionary. It is basically a simple poem, very simple poem with simple vocabulary. Right? Then, as I told you, emphasis is on the haiku moment. That sudden enlightenment, sudden feeling, oh, we didn't think about that. Right? When I write haiku, I mostly feel that when somebody reads my haiku, they should have 2 feelings. Either they should feel, oh, why didn't I think of this? I should have written this. They are so impressed by it and say, oh, why didn't I think of this? And second, they say, oh, I was thinking the same thing, but I couldn't put it into words. So I always want to incite these 2 reactions from my readers. Either one of this. Right? And the last but the most important aspect of haiku is you have to show, not tell. You have to show your readers what you feel, not what you think. Because you don't have to spoon feed your readers. Haiku is said to be a poem which is completed by the poet and the reader. Poet writes his or her half of the poem. Then he or she leaves some space for the reader to step in and make it its own. Interpret in own way. Every good haiku can be interpreted in many different ways. Like, it depends on your mood. If you are happy, you might interpret it in one way. If you are sad, you might interpret it in another way. So you just have to show what you are feeling and let your readers feel the same emotion. You don't have to tell them, oh, I'm feeling very sad, this happened. My mother passed away and I'm very sad, this happened. You have to show how you're feeling and let them feel. Right? So now I'll give you some examples. The first one, according to me, is a perfect example of haiku and show not tell. January sun. So first line tells that it's a morning and it's a winter morning. January sun, winter morning. Poet hasn't used winter morning. January sun, the long pause between. Now, the first cut is January sun. January sun is one image. The poet has left it at that. January sun, right? The long pause between icicle drips. Now, the long pause between icicle drips means that icicles are melting very slowly. When icicles are melting very slowly, when the sun is not too bright. If the sun is bright, icicles will melt very fast. So she hasn't told, this haiku poet is, if you are an English literature student, she's a descendant of F. Fitzgerald, the great Gatsby author. So she's a very renowned poet. So she hasn't showed you that icicles, the sun is mild and the icicles are not melting very fast. She has just shown you January sun, placed one image in front of you. And the second image, the long pause between icicle drips. Now you have to conclude why there is a long pause between icicle drips. Because it's peak winter, January sun is not very bright, and so she has very skillfully shown you, not tell you that it's a winter morning or the sun is not very bright. Sometimes January sun is bright, but through her second and third line, she has shown that it's not very bright. Next one is a same because it's about humans. Planetarium, my child's grip begins to loosen. Now the poet has not told you that the child has got excited when he reached the planetarium. He has got excited and he just wants to run away and cut loose and explore the whole thing. Just told you planetarium, cut. Planetarium is one scene. Now what happens in planetarium? My child's grip begins to loosen. When the child entered the planetarium, was holding his mother or father's hand because children are normally scared of the new places. But as he sees the planetarium, he wants to let go of father or mother's hand and roam about, explore the planetarium. So the excitement of the child is shown, it's not told. He hasn't told that child got excited or child got mesmerized by seeing the planetarium, just shown you. And you can interpret the child must be very excited. Scenic drive. So one scene is scenic drive. You can imagine that the couple or the family is going out for a drive. It's a beautiful countryside or mountainside, whatever. Looking everywhere, then for a pacifier. When he left it at looking everywhere. So you feel, okay, it's a scenic drive and the family is looking everywhere at the scenery. But no, the aha moment or the haiku moment comes in for a pacifier. So this gives the whole picture. That a family with small kids is on a scenic drive and they are looking everywhere for a pacifier. So the last line adds a punch. It gives a surprise. So when we write, I personally always try to give a punch or the aha moment or the haiku moment in the last line. By the time you reach the third line, your whole perspective changes. When you started reading a haiku, it was something else. When you reach by the end of it, it's something else. The next, this one life. So the poet is talking about one life. And so the first line, you can imagine she's contemplative. Right? I moved the sparrow to higher ground. Now, when you read it, either you can think that the poet is talking about herself, this one line. And I moved the sparrow to higher ground, so in this one life, I should do good deeds. I should, safeguard a sparrow. Or she's thinking about sparrow's life, that she has also got only one life and I should somehow preserve that life. So it's up to readers what she or he interprets from the first line. So haiku is like an onion, layer by layer. When you read in different moods, when you read in different times, it reveals itself in all its glory. It reveals hidden meanings of it. Then stepping in, the brook has a sound for my feet. So stepping in, that means poet is stepping in somewhere. The brook has a sound. You live so nearby the rivers, mountain rivers, below. As you reach near a brook, you know there is a river or a brook because it has a definite sound. Now, the poet says, for my feet. That means the poet is stepping in the brook, and when you step in water, it has a distinct sound. He's not telling you what sound it is. He's just telling you that when I step in a brook, the brook's sound has a different tone when my feet lands. So, and this poet especially is very nature driven. Right? I was totally blown away by his second haiku. Suddenly, we are in the wind speed. We normally say, oh, itni tez hawa chal rahi hai, the wind is so fast. But he puts the focus on wind. Nature is omnipresent, nature is powerful. We are just small elements in it. So it's not that wind is blowing very fast and it's annoying us. It is, wind is blowing, wind always blows. We get in its way. So the focus totally shifts to nature. So how you write a haiku, in every single word you can turn the perspective. Next is rear view mirror. You have all been driving. You see something written on a rear view mirror. It's always written the objects in the mirror are closer than they appear. But the poet has very skillfully changed it to rear view mirror is one image. Right? We are closer than we appear. So now he's talking about his relationship. And he has juxtaposed it with rear view mirror. Though these two, fragment and phrase, have no relation to each other. How close we are in our relationship has no relation to rear view mirror. But when we read about rear view mirror, we know there is something scribbled on it. Like objects are closer than they appear. So he has very skillfully juxtaposed these two images. We read it, even those who do not know haiku, they can clearly draw the relationship between these two images. Then, life alone, licking the ladle. So, in just 5 words, in just 5 words, the poet has summed up the loneliness of a guy or a girl who is living alone. Now, in moods, if you are also feeling lonely, you feel, oh, he must be so lonely. He's cooking by himself, he's all alone, he's eating by himself, licking the ladle as it is. But in some other mood, where you are kind of annoyed with your family and you say, oh, how blissful. He can lick the ladle, he doesn't have to spread the table or lay the table, just take from the bowl and lick the ladle. Right? So how do you use? Now you can write a whole poem, a whole 30-line poem about loneliness, but you cannot get that impact. You cannot make your readers, sometimes you cannot make your readers to feel the loneliness. These 5 words show you. One of my own haiku, which is one of my favorites, has just 4 words, burqa and yet catcalls. So everywhere we read that, see, even our politicians say that the onus of men's action, Eve teasing, onus of men's action is always on what women wear. Right? She was asking for it. She was wearing a miniskirt, she was asking for it. She was wearing that, she was wearing tight jeans, she was asking for it. So always the onus of a man's action is on what the woman is wearing. But in just 4 lines, I could have written a long essay or long speech and it couldn't have given you that much. But I have not told you how I felt, just burqa and yet catcalls. Even if you are wearing burqa, men can still